probably just ate a toddler. More of them. More of them. You would think somebody on this road would like venison. You really would. Where's he going? Good morning. This is Bill from Curious Cars and Auto House of Naples on a lovely Florida. I think it's a Tuesday, but you know what? I don't even know what the hell day it is, and it doesn't really matter. It's just a nice day. The weather is probably in the low 60s right now. There's not much humidity. This is one of the 2 to 4 months a year of paradisical weather that we get that makes it almost worth living here year-round in Naples, Florida. I mean, the miserable heat and shitty humidity of July and August are distant memories, and there's a lovely cooling breeze in the air. And I have to say that while the weather normally makes me miserable, today it's making me absolutely chipper. So no complaints at all about the weather. There was a deer encounter a little bit earlier. There was a pack of really unpleasant looking guys, probably an alpha pack. It looked like they were fresh off a kill. They didn't seem hungry. They glared at me a little bit, but they made no threatening moves. And eventually they just sort of drifted off into the tree line. So it was nice that they went away. I don't entirely understand why the neighbor, I mean, Peter, he's Austrian. They should have a taste for venison. I don't even know if he's here, but either way, I'm going to have to talk to him about that. It would be a nice way to have a little family meal on a Friday or Saturday with some really delicious venison, plus some jerky afterwards. So we'll have to talk about all of that. Look, okay, so here it is. I've got this car today. Obviously, it's a Miata. I'm not going to beat around the bush on this thing. I like Miatas. I did not always like Miatas, but right now and for the last so many years, I do. In fact, me and a group of buddies race them. I'm not going to, we have a race car. Well, what kind of race car do you have? Well, we have a Miata. Miatas get a pretty bad rap from everybody but people who love cars, and it's just kind of a funny thing. And I went through this at work the other day with one of the sales guys who just he reminds me of myself back in the, I mean, when the Miata first came out in 1990, if something didn't have twice pipes, a V8, headers, and big loud exhaust, it just wasn't for me. And we all ridiculed the Miatas, hairdressers cars. We just made fun of them. And it wasn't until years later when we got into autocross and track days and that sort of thing that we realized the sheer brilliance of them, and actually to some extent felt bad for all of the shit talk we'd done over the years about these cars, because truly they are almost as perfect a car at what it is they're intended to do as there is in existence. So, but we'll get into all of that. But look, before I did this video, I called Robert. He's a friend of mine. He's probably the worst human being on earth. I think so. I don't know that there's any even close second place. He is a terrible, terrible person who absolutely revels in any misery that he can cause you. And in fact, if you remember, we had a really big cold snap a few, maybe 10, 15 days ago, where the weather was going to get down into the 30s. And I thought, it might be nice to have heat in the house. And my heat has has been broken, I think because of a wiring issue, for a few years. But it's never really been cold enough to care, so I didn't think about it. And all of a sudden, we've got this big cold snap coming. Robert is professionally an HVAC guy, so I mean, he could fix this thing in like 12 seconds. And I picked up my phone, I started to dial him, and I stopped. And I realized that I would rather die like the little matchstick girl, honestly, than suffer the misery that Robert is going to give me. Even if he does come over and fix my heat, he is just going to make me miserable the whole time he does it, degrade me, make me feel like a lower form of human life. And I figured it was just better to pass away in the cold than it was to have him come over. But anyway, look, Robert is the guy who got us into Miata racing, into Spec Miata. And, you know, he has lots and lots of endless opinions about things. And I thought, okay, he's going to be the guy to call on this. The last time I did a Miata video, I'm pretty sure I got some sort of a dressing down from him about all the crap that I left out. So not this time. I'm going to call Robert. I'm going to suffer the indignation. I'm going to take the shame. And I'm going to ask him what I should say about it. Well, I got absolutely like nothing. Like nothing. I mean, it was just a miserable conversation. I thought he'd regale me with, you got to talk about this or talk about that. Nah, none of that stuff. It turns out he doesn't like NBs that much, the second-gen Miatas, because they're just, they're too heavy. They're like the El Dorado of the Miata world. Never mind the NC, which is like a Vista Cruiser. But the NB apparently is just a little bit too well-appointed and wrong for him. He is an NA purist, and if I had some sort of NA that he had a inkling for, then he'd have given me something. So the hell with him. I gave him his chance. I tried. It didn't work out. And if he doesn't like what I say about this thing, well, that's up to him. This is a pretty special car. This is an 03 Miata LS, which I presume stands for luxury sport, but I truly have no idea. It's probably the best preserved ultra low mileage collectible quality Miata NB that I've seen in a decade. I mean, nothing else has even come close to this thing. We picked it up recently. Penelope actually found it, but it's going through the auto house system, and it won't be. Look, it's going to go up for an auction. It may end up on Bring a Trailer. Hopefully, it fits in with their Porsche 550 Spiders and De Tomaso Mangustas. We'll see if they accept it. But this video is for Bring a Trailer or whatever other auction site it ends up on. So as such, I've got to keep it kind of short and probably not talk about deer too much. I might not even talk about the coronavirus whiskey or the way that I'm still living like Denmark. I'm in week one. It's a little over a week now, where I've given up on it all. The hell with it. It doesn't matter to me anymore. I've made myself Denmark. I'm still taking the coronavirus whiskey to ward off the Omicron thing, but otherwise, that's it. I'm done. I don't want to hear about it anymore. I will say that having lived in Florida for the last so long, it really doesn't feel that much different from what it did a year ago, but that is the scoop anyway. So anyway, look, this rather remarkable 03 Miata is going to end up on an auction site, and that's the purpose of this video. So we're going to jump right into it like a freaking laser beam. We're going to get right on it. This is an NB. Miata has internal designations for their naming systems. The first generation was an NA. The second, like this, was an NB. The third was an NC. And the fourth, which is out now, is an ND. I think you can see the pattern that's going on there. Interestingly enough, all Miatas are made in Hiroshima. I read that. I thought, that's maybe a little bit political, so I won't go any further, but they're all built there. The name Miata is derived from High German, which means reward or some such like that, which, is, I guess, your reward for putting in a long, hard, grueling day in the camp. You can come out and drive your Miata home. They used a design credo across the 4 generations called, and God, forgive me if my Japanese pronunciation is crap. I'm sure it is, but I'm going to try it. Jinba Ite, which translates into English as a rider and horse as one body. it's probably better to take that as some sort of a horse riding thing than, you know, the way you might have taken a wrong turn on a late night internet site or something. So, but anyway, that was the design philosophy for the car, and I think they did hold true to that. And the Miata, right from the get-go, was an absolute smash. You can't say that it created the market, because the market did formerly exist, you know, the small English two-seat roadster. But by the time these cars came out in '89 as a 1990 model, there was really only one car that was similar, and that was the Alfa Romeo Spider Veloce. And even though it was similar, it was much, much more expensive. It was attractive to look at, but was a giant piece of shit. And it just was not really a true competitor. So one could argue if Miata didn't exactly create the market for this car, they certainly revived and resuscitated it. And it took all the manufacturers by surprise, who just had no idea that the market for an old British sports car still existed. So kudos to Miata for doing that. And it got endless awards and lauding from the automotive press and journalists and magazines. And Car and Driver had it. They had 17 times the Miata has appeared on Car and Driver's 10 best list. I mean, you can't really go wrong with that. Even Jeremy Clarkson of Top Gear, probably one of the most miserable bastards of all time, and a true idol for me, he said this. He said, the fact that is, if you want a sports car, the MX-5 is perfect. Nothing on the road will give you a better value. Nothing will give you so much fun. The only reason I'm giving it 5 stars is because I can't give it 14. I mean, that is very, very high praise from that guy. And I do have to say that I concur with it 100%. So it may be an overdone topic, but I don't care. You know, I own a Miata. I have a race car. I mean, in fact, we're racing this weekend at Sebring. And like most Miata owners, I will bore you to tears in a way that people talking about their pets or grandchildren could only dream of. I suspect most other Miata owners out there are kind of nodding in agreement at that. So the question of this video is, you know, why are these things so good? Again, overdone topic, but the hell with it. I'm going to cover it my way. They are good. I mean, in terms of value for the money, I would easily put it on par with the C8, which we reviewed a few weeks ago, and I'll link to that in the description. You know, that car is an exotic quality, high-performance vehicle for half the price of the cars that it competes with. And, you know, it's a tremendous value. It's a lot of car for the money. And while the Miata is obviously in no way exotic, and frankly it doesn't have that much that it competes with, even now, even though it's spawned a bunch of competitors, it still kind of holds its own place in the car world. It is an incredible amount of value for its money. It's reliable, it's incredibly fun to drive. You can't hurt it. I mean, the abuse that I put the spec Miata through at the racetrack, with the shifting, the revving, the jumping over curbs, the crashes multiple times, I've used the same engine for 2 years. It lives at 7,000 RPM. I've money shifted it a couple of times. The car just keeps going, and it's absolutely incredible. And there is just, to me, no other car in the world that could take the kind of abuse that gets heaped on these things at the racetracks every weekend without costing their drivers a fortune. And that is probably why the Miata is the most raced car on any given weekend at all of the, you know, tracks around the country and the world, you know, the SCCA guys. Miatas, a lot of people switch between Miatas and Corvettes, but there are more Miatas out there than anything else. So anyway, look, this is going to be a little bit of a short take, and we're just going to dive directly into it. How the Miata came into existence is a big part of the answer about why it's such a good car. And it started with a guy named Bob Hall. He grew up in the 60s and 70s in Southern California. He became absolutely obsessed with Japanese culture. His dad had been an American military pilot stationed in England and had developed a joy and a love for these small, you know, the MGAs and TDs and that sort of thing. And when he came back to America, he brought some with him. And Hall and his twin brother grew up driving them, fixing them, wrenching on them, you know, cleaning up oil leaks and, you know, wondering why they wouldn't start, and grew to love the whole concept of of the small British sports car. And of course, he had become obsessed with Japanese culture. Conversely, no real reason. You'd think he would have come obsessed with British culture, become like an Anglophile or something, but he didn't. And he went over to Japan as an exchange student. He taught himself Japanese from TV and comic books, and just really fell in love with the culture. He went back to California. He continued his love for cars, and at age 20, he managed to convince Motor Trend magazine that he knew more about Japanese cars than anyone they had on staff, that they should hire him. Reminds me a little bit of Zorarkas Duntov when he went to GM. And they did. You know, obviously they thought the kid was pretty impressive. So they took him on board and they sent him to Japan to sort of report back on the happenings of the Japanese car industry. And while he was there, he met a guy named Kenichi Yamamoto, who was the new head of R&D at Mazda. And they struck up a friendship. They had a chat. Hall insisted that Mazda should build an updated version of the classic British Roadster. And that stuck in Yamamoto's mind. Fast forward a few years later, Hall is now working for Mazda in their R&D department, and Yamamoto gets a job running the company. So they rekindle their talk, their plans. Yamamoto greenlights development of the Miata project. It was called the V705. He had their different design studios come up with 3 different plans. One was front drive, one was front engine rear drive, and one was a mid-engine, like the Toyota MR2. And it was pretty ballsy because they already had the RX-7. They already had a sports car. They didn't really need it. It just shows you the amount of faith that these guys had in Hall, that there was something to what he was going on about. Well, anyway, the front mid-engine, as they call it, because the engine's behind the front wheels, won the day. They made a mock-up of this. That's when it was called the V705. They drove it around Southern California to see what kind of reactions they would get, and it was a massive hit right off the get-go. People stopped. They loved it. They thought it was terrific. They enjoyed it, and Mazda took notice of that. So production got a green light. They started putting them together. They came out in '89. They didn't really know what was going to happen, and it went crazy. They could not keep them on. If they could have built twice as many of these things, they would have sold them. There were waiting lists. There were dealer markups. The press went absolutely crazy. It was just an absolute institution from the moment it was released. Everybody loved it. They thought it was really cool, other than obviously punk high school kids like myself who needed small black Chevys. You know, the first 2 years of production, it just couldn't even keep up with the demand. The Miata, it would go on to sell, they've sold more than 1 million Miatas. The Guinness Book of World Records has it listed as the best-selling 2-seat roadster of all time. And it's, you know, Mazda essentially discovered a market that had been forgotten by all of the major manufacturers. And once this thing came out and started selling well, they took notice and some competitors started to emerge. But if there wasn't the Miata, there are cars you wouldn't have now. And those are like the Porsche Boxster, the Mercedes SLK, the Audi TT. You remember the Pontiac Solstice and the Saturn Sky, and more. It was an absolute game changer, and it created a stir within the realm of the car market. So anyway, we'll get into why it worked and why it worked so well. I'm going to take a 2-minute pause there, catch my breath again, and we're going to keep going. All right, so in the interest of time, let's just hop directly into this car. And for those uninitiated with these long-winded videos, my apologies. But here it is. So this is an '03 Mazda Miata LS. And one of the best preserved ones that I've seen. Only 13,000 miles on this thing. I mean, you want to talk about a garage queen. This is it. And it's very unusual for these cars because most of them get driven. While the original Miata, the NA, relied heavily on design cues from the Lotus Elan. In fact, the Mazda provided an Elan to the engineers and designers as they were building the NA, and they took a lot from it. The second gen that came out out in '99, while it shared most of the underpinnings from the original Miata, they went a whole different direction with the styling. Gone were the little pop-up headlights, and that was, I think, mostly because of the safety concerns for pedestrians, which is a shame because I love pop-up headlights. But while the original Miata looked like a Lotus, this one, and I'm going to get laughter for this, but I'm going to put in a picture to prove it, I think it relied heavily on the Dodge Viper for inspiration, and has the swoops and curves and headlights and the 5-point Miata air. It started, again, like the air intake in the bumper stopped being happy and became a little bit more aggressive. But I think they knocked it out of the park. I think it's a beautifully styled car. This one, being pretty loaded, has the full Tupperware kit, as they call it. You can see it has this big air dam which surrounds the fog lights. It comes off the bottom of the front bumper, going into these big side skirts, which are bolted on there, the ground effects that continues into the rear on the back of the rear bumper. It's got little extensions on either side. Even has the deck lid spoiler, which covers up a little ducktail that these have naturally. But again, full Tupperware on this car, one of the options that these things could have. The taillights in the back are made to sort of match the front headlights. They look very similar in design. This one has these saw blade 16-inch alloy wheels, denoting that it got the sport suspension, which we'll get into when we do the mechanicals. And all in all, it's very simple, very interesting, and I think a terrific looking car. So let's just dive into it. To get into the trunk, I'm going to use this thing here. You see it has a little key lock where you can lock the center console. That's because you've got manual releases for the fuel door and for the trunk. All right, so it has a very nice, good-sized trunk. I mean, you're actually going to be able to fit a lot of crap in there. You could fit in 2 sets of golf clubs even, sniper rifles, toddlers, infants, whatever you need to put in the trunk, you're going to have no issues at all. Even a nice little compartment over there for your narcotics and such, and cozy for your lug wrench. Underneath this carpet, you're going to find the little donut spare tire. Underneath this little particle board insert is the battery and some of the jacking stuff. So very, very simple, not unlike the British Roadsters that it emulates, and no frills, just what it's supposed to be. On this, it's sort of incredible. You can see it still has like the little factory stickers on, you know, the taillights. This is all stuff that gets worn off and flung away every time a car gets miles on it and washed a million times and rubbed and so on and so forth. This thing is so well preserved. When I compare it to my spec car, it's absolutely hilarious. I'll have a look under the hood. The hood is aluminum, by the way, of course, for weight. And that is one of the key features of the Miata, is keeping the weight down. In fact, the ND, their current release Miata, really doesn't weigh any more than the first one, and that was considered really getting back to the roots. Anyway, this is a double overhead cam, 1.8 liter inline 4-cylinder. Very, very free revving. In '01, they came out with the VVT system, variable valve timing. That's what all this crap is here. And it bumped up the horsepower a little bit. In spec racing, there's some argument between using the VVT versus the 99 and 2000 models, which didn't have it, and you know, there's stuff to be said for either one. When you look at the condition of this thing, I mean, it still has the tag decal on the wiring harness, the way the bolts have absolutely zero corrosion or anything on them. Robert, when he had looked under, he came and visited this car when he heard about it. He said he'd never seen one still with the gray tape around the wiring harness back there. This is a weak spot in these. The dipsticks off in that yellow ring at the top breaks off. Well, it's still on this one. And everything looking very nice and pretty incredibly well preserved under the hood of this thing. It's ordered the way that I would have. You could get ABS on these cars as an option, but frankly, they're better without it. It's not a thing you want if you're going to be racing them. Maybe you want it on the street, but you know, for the guys who want the purest experience, ABS is not what you want, and this one does not have it. It does have power steering, which was of course standard at the time, but on the track we disconnect all that. But anyway, under the hood of this thing is just epic. You can see that the steering, the wheels are set forward of the engine. That's why they call it front mid-engined. The engine is pushed back towards the firewall to create a better balance, to give it a near perfect 50-50 weight distribution. It also uses what's called a PPF, or power plant frame, and what that does is connect the rear differential, the rear subframe, to the engine at the front via the transmission to create this incredibly stiff chassis that makes the engine more responsive. There's no flex at all, and you can in fact drive these cars around with the bodies removed. I mean, it's like a Corvette. It's a pretty neat feature. Being the LS, the upgraded suspension, this has bracing from the strut towers. It's got four-wheel independent wishbones front and back with Bilstein shocks, and the LS gives you bigger brakes up front and in the back, as well as stiffer tuning. Some people say that, you know, it's great if you're going to be autocrossing or that sort of thing, but if you're just looking for pure driving fun, the standard suspension is more in line with what you would have wanted from an MGB. But anyway, there it is, and all very incredible under the hood. And what can I tell you? So, what a light hood. I can hold that thing up with my pinky. That is an absolute welcome change from all the old American stuff I've been doing lately, where you have to be Arnold Schwarzenegger to hold that thing up. So I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to pause here, and I'm going to inject the soft top video that I took earlier, which I pretend I'm doing now, but I didn't. I did it earlier. I'm going to inject that in, and then we're going to get back into the interior of the car and go for a drive. Alright, so this is the car with the soft top up and in place, and just like the vintage early British roadsters that it emulates, it's an extremely simple soft top. It did get a glass back window starting in 1999. That was a nice upgrade. It also is just an absolute piece of cake to use, because this is an LS model with the leather and the parchment interior. It has a matching tan top. It's sort of a stay-fast cloth canvas, very, very nice, and to get it down is just the simplest thing in the world. So you hop inside, lower these sun visors a little bit, open up that guy, open up this guy. I like to give it a little push at that stage and close them back before I throw the top back, which I will now do. And there it goes. And it's that simple. And you can do it from sitting in the driver's seat, no issue at all. You don't have to get out of the car. It just flings right back. You put the top cover over it if you want, and everything's lovely. There's also this flip up sun, for the love of God, wind protection thing. I mean, you know, you wouldn't think it does much, just a couple inches, a little whatnot, but it does cut down on the wind buffeting inside the cockpit at speed. It's a nice little touch. So anyway, there it is. There's the soft top back down, and we're going to keep going. Okay, so the top's back down, and now we're going to have a look inside and go for a spin. You can see the cover has been reapplied. Nice little top cover they give you to snap into place, and of course the wind deflector. When Robert says that these things are Eldorados, he's not entirely wrong. I mean, when you compare it to the NA, the first generation Miata, this interior is significantly more opulent. While they use sort of a flat cardboard door panel, this thing uses a formed panel with entrenched armrests, and you see it has a big speaker. This one does have the Bose premium audio, so you get another little tweeter up there. You get a fancy chrome door pull, and even some kind of a weird little perforated insert. So, you know, Mazda really did up the equipment equipment game for the second generation. I mean, you could get a bunch of stuff in the original one, but nothing like this. This one has parchment interior, kind of a nice color. It does have the leather, which, you know, I don't feel is a waste in these cars or unnecessary, because the original MGBs and Healey's and other British cars also had leather, and I think it works nice. It's nice and supple. These have never been dyed or touched up in any way. This is the true original leather seats as they came in a, you know, very well preserved car. Also has embroidered floor mats, and where the airbag wheels in the NAs had lost the plot a little bit and became big 4-spoke affairs, the NBs got these 3-spoke Nardi wheels with a smaller footprint on the airbag that I think looks a lot nicer. So you can see the bracing in here on the you know, there's little stuff like this, which just helps keep the car nice and stiff. I'll zoom in on the VIN plate for a moment. If someone is looking at this thing, they can pause that. I think on the other side, there's an equipment sticker. Let me see if I can find that. No, just the VIN stickers. All right, so let's fire this thing up and see what we got. You know, even for a little tinny door, it has a nice solid closing sound. You also get these sort of aerodynamic sport mirrors on both sides that are, of course, power controlled. You'd expect no less from your Cadillac. All right, and we're gonna stick that in over here and fire it up. God, everything is hard to do one-handed. On the VBTs, you do have to clutch in to start it. I don't think you did on the earlier versions, but on this one you do. And in fact, that really screwed me up in racing for a few months. We couldn't figure it out. We disconnected that, and it just screwed up. VBTs are a little more hyper-technical, and without it connected, it just revved and revved at idle, and we couldn't figure out why, but it's another story. By this year, they had gone back to white-faced gauges as an option, because that was kind of the style at the time, and they did add these sort of aluminum chrome looking trim rings around the speedo and tack. Like any good sports car, it has the information that you need in an easy to look at style directly in front of you. You've got your fuel gauge to the left, you've got your 7,000 redline tack, you've got your oil pressure in the middle, you've got your 150 mile an hour speedo, and your temp gauge over to the right. It's a beautiful, simple instrument cluster. You've got 13,845 miles on this thing, which is pretty epic. You got your headlight controls over here, your wiper and cruise control over there, some on-off switches for the fog lights and cruise and dimmer control. This is interesting. These vents on these cars are designed that when you remove them, it will perfectly fit an aftermarket race gauge, like you know, whatever you want to have a voltmeter on there, an air fuel mixture gauge, you know, a more proper oil pressure and water temp. They will just fit directly into this, to the point that friction will almost keep them in place. You know, maybe a little bit of clear silicone just to make sure, but and that is just part of why these cars are so well supported for grassroots racing. Mazda created them for that purpose to a large extent, and they support them incredibly well. They have a whole factory setup where you can buy all the race parts for it. Down here you can see this one being extremely well optioned, has the Bose system with the CD. You don't often see the cassette in 03, but there it is. You know, again, they just checked off all the boxes. It gave you kind of a faux aluminum trim around the center console and the radio. That was an option. You've got a very simple climate control, which just works, and that's all it's meant to do. You can turn off your passenger airbag here. You've got a cigarette lighter, which, yeah, nobody smoked in this thing. Nobody smokes anymore. A beautiful little short throw shifter. This one has the 5-speed and the 430 Torsen, the limited slip that you want for racing. There was an optional 6-speed that drops you down to a 390 gearbox or you know, gear unit in the back. Yeah, whichever you want, I don't know, but I like that this one has the 5-speed and the 430. It seems to me to be the most responsive as well. You got an e-brake, you got your your power windows. You got these cup holders. These things famously wear out and they just flap around. These things still have a tremendous amount of tension on them, which is nice, and you can really tell that this is just an unused car, mostly a garage queen. In the glove box, this is the original wheel lock thing. I hate wheel locks. If this were my car, I'd probably remove them. It has factory Mazda touch-up paint, which I'll put in that bag as well. And then a very nice set of books and extra keys that came with it, as one would expect from a one-owner, well-preserved 13,000 mile car. Up here you've got a very simple rear view mirror, what you'd expect. Two little, useful sun visors. This one has a little bit of a cocaine mirror for the passenger, but not much, and everything nice and proper. But the height of simplicity, which is the point. It's nice materials. They're not super expensive materials, but they're nice enough, and the build quality is absolutely perfect. It all stays tightened together. Nothing vibrates, nothing rattles. Mazda stayed true to the idea that they were going to build a British a British sports car that actually worked, stayed together, and was of a high quality. And of course you can see it as an airbag on the passenger side. Let's go for a spin. It will fit somebody who's 6 feet. You get a little bit taller than that, you're going to be maybe a little bit cramped, but you can still do it. In fact, a 6-footer can still straight arm the steering wheel, which is pretty cool. Some of the bigger racers actually drop the floors in these things, and then they will fit, somebody who's 6'5", but that's nothing you do for a street car. The throttle response is unbelievable. Very, very nice. They just got such a perfect balance in this car, and a big part of that is that power plant frame, which doesn't allow there to be any tension in the drivetrain at all. Lovely exhaust note, perfect shifter feel. It is just the joy of driving, and that is the job of this car. It doesn't want to do anything else. That's its purpose. It stays true to that, and as such, Mazda has essentially attained automotive perfection, at least as far as the open-top Roadster goes. They resisted the urge to make it bigger, meaner, more powerful, more complex, and they just kept it simple. And that simplicity has been the key to the Miata success from the beginning. Steering wise, incredibly precise. The turn-in is unbelievable. It can make a bad driver good and make a good driver great. It does everything you ask it to do. When you go through a corner and you let out the throttle, it can kick the tail out a little bit, put the throttle back in, and it just takes it right back. The Miata, it does with so much ease everything that you have to work for hard in other cars. It truly is one of the best balanced sports cars on the road, and that is why they're so popular in terms of racing, and that's why they have such a huge following of people who love to drive them. It's not fast, it's not a rocket ship, but it makes your commute to work fun. Up in traffic again. I'm driving this thing like it's a Mustang. Yeah, and of course you get some wind noise, and you get a nice exhaust note in your ear when the top is down, but you feel alive. You feel connected to the machine. You just feel like you're having more fun than you should be having in a car with the sum of these parts. And again, that's the secret to what makes the car so damn good. So anyway, look, I'm gonna wrap it up there. I really appreciate you guys having a look. This one, again, is going to be on one of these auction sites. I'm not sure which. You know, I'm going to submit it to Bring a Trailer today, so hopefully they run it within the next 7 weeks or so. Thank you for having a look. Really, really appreciate it. Again, this is an 03 Mazda Miata LS. It's a one-owner car, 13,000 miles. I'm going to call it museum quality. And if you want the best one out there, I have a feeling you're not going to be able to do much better than this one. So thanks again. Really appreciate it. And we will see you with the next one. Take care.